Welcome to our webinar for May 2025. The topic is EFT Processing for Sage Intacct, and we're going to go through some functionality which is beyond the basics. My name's Anne from Orchid Systems, and I'll be available after the webinar for a live Q&A. EFT Processing allows you to create EFT files for your vendor payments, your employee reimbursements, and your customer direct debits. And the functionality that I'm going to be discussing covers all those EFT files for vendor payments, employee reimbursements, and customer direct debits. The first topic I'm going to run through is importing EFT details for customers and vendors. We have new Sage Intacct custom reports, which allows you to import and export customer and vendor EFT details. We're also going to take a deep dive into the EFT formats, into the new validations you can do on fields, for example, the minimum and maximum length of fields, which fields are mandatory, but also how to create drop-down fields. For example, if the users need to enter BNE for their beneficiary paying the costs, or share for the shared costs, or other for another cost-bearing payment method. We're also going to run through the different types of payment date you can have in an EFT file and how to change it if you want to. And we're going to look at the Australian BPAY formats and where the BPAY reference can be stored to be used in the EFT files. We're also going to have a look at EFT security, both on the Orchid EFT objects, but also on the Sage Intacct objects, the security that's needed in using EFT processing. There are two ways to export and import EFT vendor and EFT customer details. First, on the AP vendor or the AR customer, you can create your own custom view and include all the EFT fields that you want to see in that view, and then use that view to export and import vendors' EFT details, and the same applies to customers. Or you could use Orchid's custom reports to import and export the EFT details. So in the custom reports, you can import these two reports, Orchid EFT fields for customers, Orchid's EFT fields for vendors, and then use those to export and import the details. The advantages of using the custom reports are that all the EFT fields are already configured in the custom reports, so you do not need to select them one by one. And secondly, the EFT file format is imported by name, for example, CAN_CPA005 or NAB_BPAY, not by the format ID. So you don't have to find out the format ID for each of the EFT file formats in order to import them. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to install the Orchid's EFT reports, and then how to use the Orchid EFT reports. And all of this is in the online help. To install the custom reports, you go to the online help and download the custom reports XML file. And then from within Sage Intacct, you go to Platform Services or Customization Services, Custom Packages, install a new package, and then choose that XML file that you've just downloaded. And then click Import. And after importing, you should find those two reports in your custom reports. And to use these reports, let's look at the Orchid EFT fields vendor report first. If you view the report, you will see in the columns all the EFT fields on the vendor have been included in the report. So you can run that report and export to CSV and download the file. And this will create a CSV file for you with all those columns in the report. And if you have already configured some of the vendors, you will have an example row that you can use in copying and pasting your information from the source of where you have the EFT details for your vendors. And then you could copy and paste the details from that external source onto this spreadsheet. You can see what the EFT file format name should be and which columns should be filled in for the particular format that you're configuring for. So if you were configuring Lee Thomas for the CAN CIBC, you would need to fill in CAN CIBC here, and then the associated banking details for Lee Thomas. Save the CSV. And then you would go to your AP vendors and import, choosing that file that you have just updated. You would get the normal validations from Sage Intacct, and I have some hashes in my vendor numbers. But if we went to go and look at Thomas, if we went to go and look at Lee Thomas's details, you could see he's now been configured for CAN CIBC and the appropriate information has been imported. The Orchid EFT Fields vendor report exports all your vendors. But if you wanted just a subset of your vendors, you could duplicate the report. And then you could add some columns and then filter on those columns. Or you could include additional prompts and then select the fields that you want to prompt on, like default currency. And give the report an appropriate name, and then save the custom report. And now when you run the vendor export, you could choose the default currency. And the file that gets downloaded would only be vendors with the USD currency. And similarly, to import EFT details for your customers, you could run the Orchid EFT Fields customer report, and this has the predefined columns for EFT already included, and it will be selecting all your customers, and you would export to CSV, download that file, and then we can open up that downloaded file. And here we can copy and paste the EFT details for our customers from the external source. So if, for example, Community Agency Services is going to be configured for the SEPA, we need to fill in the bank name, the account name, and the EFT payment reference as the country of origin, and provide the SWIFT and IBAN as indicated here. So if I was just to copy those details for the Community Agency Services, put their own IBAN, and then go to Accounts Receivable Customers, import that file, this is the standard Sage Intacct import, so if there were any errors we would get that message accordingly. And now if we go and edit the Community Agency Services on the Orchid EFT tab, we can see the information has been imported correctly. But we need to make the date a 10-character field. And in the same way as we could for the accounts payable EFT vendor import details, if we only wanted to do certain EFT customers, we can duplicate this report and then we could add columns and filters on those columns, or just include an additional prompt if that suits you, and perhaps choose all the customers with a default currency. And give this new report a name, and then save the report. And now when we run this report, we would choose the currency and export to CSV, download the file, and now we only see the euro currency customers that we would then fill in or change the EFT details and re-import as is required. EFT Processing is able to validate the field size and the field values of some of the EFT fields. In earlier versions, you could only validate the branch code and the account number in terms of field length. But as of the product update issued in April 2025, you are now able to validate the field size for all the EFT fields on the EFT vendor, the EFT customer, the EFT employee, and some of the fields on the EFT bank. And you're also able to do a list of valid values for some fields. For example, here on the screen, we have a transaction code which needs to be a 22 or a 32. So instead of just giving the message 22 or 32, we are now able to give a drop-down value denoted by the little downward pointing arrow. And when you click on the arrow, you can select one of the valid values. When is the warning message displayed? If there is a length or a valid values limit on some of the fields. So it gets displayed when the EFT details are being entered. And this is when the EFT bank record is being created or amended, when the AP vendor record is being created or amended, on the Orchid EFT tab, on the AR customer EFT details tab, and on the employee EFT details tab. The field or fields that do not pass the validation test will be shown in red. It is just a warning message. You are still able to save the record if these details are incorrect. When you come to generate the EFT file using AP payment requests or AR payment requests or employee payment requests, if some of the data does not pass the validations, for example, below the source reference for the vendor, then 20116, the source reference is blank and it needs to be a minimum of 2 characters long for the state or province code, then it will not let you generate the EFT file. And similarly, when you're coming to download an EFT file, if one or more of the fields do not match the validations, it will not let you download the EFT file. So in more detail, what fields can be validated? On the EFT bank, we can validate the actual bank account number and bank code of your bank making the payment. And we can validate the extra fields, extra 1 to extra 10, on the EFT bank record. And we can also validate the source reference for the AP payment and AR payment fields. On the EFT vendor and EFT employee record, we can validate the account number and bank code. We can also validate the extra fields for the vendor or supplier or employee, extra 1 to extra 50. There's 50 extra fields on the vendor and employee record. And we can do the vendor or employee payment reference field. And on the EFT customer, we can validate the account number and bank code and all the extra fields on the customer, extra 1 through to extra 50, and the customer payment reference. And here we can see on the EFT bank record, the payer or state or province code must be 2 characters long. On the accounts receivable customer, the country code must be 2 characters long, and there must be a date of signature, which must be 10 characters long. And on the supplier, we need to have the transaction code, which must be 2 characters. And there's a drop down, so we could choose between 22 and 32. The validation rules are applied in the EFT format. For example, in this particular Europe SEPA direct debit format, the customer payment reference needs to be exactly 2 characters long. The customer extra 3, which is configured to be the mandate ID, must be 1 to 5 characters long. And the customer extra 4 must be 10 characters long, and this is the date of the signature of the mandate. And customer extra 5 has been configured to have a drop-down with 2 values. The first one is core, with the description of SEPA core direct debit, and the second one is B2B, with a description of SEPA business to business B2B direct debit. Although Orchid will do any changes for new and amended formats for customers, You can do your own changes if you want. So for example, if you wanted to change the size of a field, if it was currently set for the field vendor extra 7, it was set 4:6. That means it must be between 4 and 6 characters long. If you wanted to change that between 4 and 8, you could go 4:8 and save the format file. If you are making changes from the standard that we sent you, please let us know or keep a copy, because if we send you a new update of the EFT file format, we don't want to overwrite your particular changes. And if you want to add a list of valid values, you can say for that particular field name, the field name.value equals key pipe description, and you can have as many key type descriptions as you need. So looking at the example for vendor extra 13, we have 3 values: debt, which is for debtors, share, which is for shared, and cred, which is for creditors. And now we're going to have a look at how we can use the length and the valid values. Having a look at these field sizes and validations from within Sage Intacct, first we'll go to the EFT Banks record, and we'll use the HSBC ISO 2022 as an example. And here it's been configured for our 700 CHK bank with the South African HSBC ISO 20022 format. And opening up the associated EFT format at the same time, so we can look at both at the same time, we can see the branch and account number is set to 0 to 20 and 0 to 34 respectively. And this is because you do not need a branch or an account code to do ISO 2022 payments. And then we see bank extra 4 has been labeled ID type tag, and it has a tooltip, other, BIC or BEI, and a drop down from the values so that we can choose either other or BIC or BEI. Bank extra 2 has been configured with a size of 2, and if we blank it off, we'll get an error message showing that it must be 2 characters. And so keying in again ZA for South Africa, the error message goes away. And the following fields are the associated bank extra fields on the bank. And looking to see how this format relates to vendors, if we select that format on our vendor, you can see the branch code and account number has no validation for it, and that is because for the branch code and the account number we have a minimum length of 0, because these fields are not needed in a ISO 2022 payment. The account name should be filled in, the bank name should be filled in, and then for the vendor we need a 2-character code, exactly 2 characters long, for the ISO country code. And then we need a charge bearer value. There's a tooltip which shows us it could be debt, share or cred, and a drop down so we can choose debtor, share or creditor. And the IBAN number is in vendor extra 4 and the SWIFT number is in vendor extra 5, and neither of these two have a minimum size, but they could have had. And the bank's ISO country code, 2 characters long, is in DEST extra 8, and DEST extra 12 is used for the intermediary bank SWIFT code. And these vendor extra fields are the same ones that are used for payments to employees. So on the Employee Orchid EFT tab, if we select the same bank format, you can see the same validations apply for the employee records. And from an accounts receivable customers Orchid EFT tab, using the Nutcher EFT file format, you can see the route number or branch number needs to be at least 8 characters. The account number must be at least 5 characters. The account name and bank name are optional. And we need to select the transaction code for the direct debits and a transaction code for the refunds. So these validations that we've seen so far are just warning messages when the data is captured. But when you come to generate an Orchid EFT file, so let's use accounts payable payment requests as an example. And if I select all the payments for this particular format and click Generate, the validation on the EFT bank says that the bank account number must be at least 17 characters long, whereas for all the vendors and the bank account itself, the account number that's been entered is not 17 characters long, so it will not create an EFT file for you. And also when you come to download an EFT file, the validations will be reapplied. So if we came to download this particular file format, we're going to get the same error messages. So you cannot either create or generate or download an EFT file if the data does not match the validations in the EFT file format. In the EFT file, we can have 3 different dates as a payment date in the EFT file. The first one is the effective date. And this is the date that first starts off at the same value when you first generate the EFT file, but it can be changed. So it is user changeable after the payment is processed. You can say what your effective date is. So this is useful if you want to date your EFT file in the future, because Intacct does not allow you to do future dated payments. Or maybe you generated the payment over a month ago and now you're only sending it through to the bank now, and they do not allow backdated payments. So you could change your EFT file format to use the effective date, the date that you see on the screen. Or you could use the payment date. So this is the date from the posted payment transaction. And in the EFT file, you would use entry date or first entry .date, depending on if the field is being used in the header or on the detail line. And the final option you have is today's date. This is the date from the server. So right now, when you click download, what is today's date? So let's have a look at that in Sage Intacct. Looking at the Nutcher EFT file format, the payment date is normally included in the header, so header AR for accounts receivable, or header AP for accounts payable, or in the detail AR, detail AP. So let's look at AP first of all. Detail AP does not have a date in. So in the Nutcher, we only have a date in the header. So header AP, we can see today, and that is the date the file is created, and we can see first entry.date. So in the Nutcher file, we're using the payment date from the first payment that is in the file, and that is the date of transaction for the bank. So if we go to our EFT file list, and we download this file, and open it up, in the header we can see this is today's date and this is the first entry, payment date. So if we had a scenario where they would not accept payments dated in the past, what we could do is change our EFT format to use effective date, and then we could use the date here. Instead of the 16th of April, we could change it to today's date, or tomorrow's date if we're going to upload the file tomorrow. So if we go back to our EFT format, and change the Nacha format for our accounts payable header to effective date, and then back on our EFT file list, we can go ahead and change the effective date. So let's make it May the 22nd. And what you can see is EFT Processing has recognized that effective date is used in the format. So it's made a copy of the old file format that we've downloaded using the effective date of the 16th of April. And now we have a new file with the 22nd of May as the effective date. And now when we download this file, we can see we have the date created of the 19th of May and the effective date of the 22nd of May. So we could change any format to use effective date instead of payment date if it suited our payment processing and uploads to the bank. You can use Orchid's EFT Processing to create BPAY files for your vendor payments. The EFT file format can include the BPAY reference from either the EFT details on the AP vendor. In this example, we're using Dest Extra 2 and it's formatting it over 20 digits. But you could use any of the Dest Extra fields or the vendor payment reference for the BPAY customer reference number. Or you could use the AP invoice number for the invoice that's been applied to the payment. Or you could use the AP invoice description from the invoice that is being applied to the payment. If you are using either the invoice number or the invoice description, you must create one payment applied to each invoice, or you can create a single payment and apply it to multiple invoices, but use the Sage Intacct option to generate individual payment lines for each of the individual AP invoices so that you get all the BPAY references in the file as separate payments. Apart from the security requirements that you need to grant a user access to gain access to an Orchid EFT screen, for example, EFT AP payment requests, there's a few indirect permissions that you need to set. So on EFT banks, if you are running entity security, so a user may have access at an entity level but not at a company level, and if the company address is required in the EFT file, then you must use the copy from company on the EFT bank, which copies the company address to the bank EFT bank records so that the users who only have entity access can still create the EFT file. And also, users who generate an EFT file need to have read-write access to the EFT bank records, because on the EFT bank record we have a file sequence number, which is a unique number and increases by 1 each time the file is created. And it's required by many banks. So when you generate an EFT file, you need to be able to update the EFT bank record. And there are some Sage Intacct object security that's needed for EFT processing. In the company permissions, you need to have access to the transaction currencies. In the general ledger permissions, you need to drill down to all transactions from reports. And in cash management, you need read permissions to the appropriate checkings accounts. So let's have a look at this now. If you are using entity security, and if users at the entity level do not have access to the company record, then when you're setting up your EFT banks, you must copy from company to copy the address from the company record to the appropriate EFT bank record. So the user creating an EFT file for this bank will have access to this bank, and they will also have access to the company address, which may be used in the EFT file. And similarly, users must have the ability to read-write the EFT bank record, because the file sequence number is increased by 1 every time the EFT file is generated for this particular bank. And if the user cannot write to the EFT bank record when they click Generate on the AP payment requests or the AR payment requests, then EFT will not be able to increase the file sequence number by 1, and you'll get an error message. And with regards to Sage Intacct security, in the online help, we have a topic on the Sage Intacct security roles needed. And you need list and view access for transaction currencies in the company permissions. In the GL permissions, you need to be able to drill down to transactions from reports. And in the cash management, you need read access to the checking accounts. That pretty much covers off all the topics that I was going to run through. If you need more information on this and any other topic for EFT processing for Sage Intacct, please go to our website. And I'm now going to open up this session for questions.